And we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. Sorry that it's solo again, but we are recording. Mr. Carl Jamieson lives on the dark side of the moon, so time zones are a thing. It's afternoon my time, so Doc and Nick are at work, but it's actually like 3 days into the future for him because, like you said, time zones, man. That's how it works, right?
Maybe, yeah.
So the scientist is trying to be nice, and he's like, no, that's not how any of this works. All right, so Carl, can you introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, so my name's Carl Jamieson. I'm an author of a recent published book, The Patmos Revelation. I live on the Isle of Wight in the UK, so it's off the south coast in the UK. My background, I'm recently retired. Since the start of COVID, I retired to concentrate on some sort of passions of mine, one of which is writing. And before that, I was a chief scientist with a range of research topics that I pursued during my career. So things like optical computing, satellite communications, design of video processing systems for military vehicles, that sort of thing. So that's really what's driven some of my interests into getting into science fiction. So yeah, that's who I am. I've got a family on the Isle of Wight, two grown-up girls, one of which is she's a princess in Disneyland, believe it or not.
Really?
So slightly different to science, which is what I thought she might get into. She ended up as a princess, but never mind.
What is the career trajectory to becoming a princess, aside from marrying a prince? I'm just imagining princess school, and we actually have a few families that listen. So if we upset your daughters that are listening, and you know who you are, I'm sorry, but it's not my fault.
No, you won't. No, she did musical theatre. She did a degree in London, musical theatre, and then they do various auditions. One of which was for Disneyland Paris, which she passed, and she's been there 3 years now. So she does various characters there. Mary Poppins and princesses and things, and she's off to Hong Kong shortly. She's got a secondment to Hong Kong, so probably a far more exciting career than I ever had in a dark room doing tech. So
yeah.
Anyway,
well, who knows? She can always go back to science if the job as Mary Poppins and princesses doesn't work out.
Well, I don't think so. No.
So. The next part of the introduction, dear listener, is how we found them. So he was actually introduced to us by Mr. Ed Hansel, or he publishes as E.M. Hansel, who's a friend of the show. He has been sending us lots of contacts with new authors because he's pretty passionate about helping other people that are just starting out as well. And we don't mind interviewing people who haven't been around as long or who are on their 1000th book. We don't care. We don't discriminate as long as it's a fun conversation. But before we get this interview started, sir, we have to do the religion question. So no pressure, but we do kick you off for the wrong answer. So Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
So I'll be brutally honest, and I'm not a great fan of any of them. And that's, I don't want to alienate my viewers, but as a scientist, I find that some of those things are too far out there, to be honest. The tech, I think you get those drives at warp space-time and that, and for me, even though there's an element of that in my book, I try and keep things a little bit sort of nearer future, where even though it is stretching things, I find as a scientist I find it more plausible, and that's why I'm not the biggest fan of those things. Obviously I've watched them, I find them interesting, but I also find them a little bit far-fetched, I'm afraid. Maybe that would change in time when I write more distant future work, but at the moment I've focused on near future stuff, which from my background, I think I need to see that the tech is plausible. I don't know whether that's an unpalatable answer, but sorry.
It's honest, and that's all we can ask for. So Since you like hard sci-fi instead of the more fantastical space wizardy stuff, do you have a favorite hard sci-fi author or series or novel?
So I've read some of Andy Weir, The Martian. I've looked at and Artemis, and I enjoy the hard sci-fi aspects of that. Although I personally found some of the characterization was not as good as the tech. So I like a book that tries to balance the tech and the personal element. And I've recently read a book, Recursion by Blake Crouch, which I find did a good job in that respect. So his tech was plausible. It was slightly a little bit more out there than mine, but I think it's plausible, and I also think that the characters are quite well done as well. So yes, I Blake Crouch, I think so. I'm going to read the I think it's Dark Matters, the next one on my reading list. But I enjoyed Recursion, and Andy Weir. I think Hail Mary is his latest one. I probably will read that. I think I read half of Artemis, and I found the young teenage girl, maybe because I've always thinking of the author who's writing the work. I found that a little bit hard to believe in that character. So I found that one, but I'll give Hail Mary a look. I think that might be back to form.
Okay. All right. And because we are polytheistic here at the Blaster and Blades, Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time, or Lord of the Rings?
So again, the fantasy aspect of those, I'm not so big on, to be honest. And I started watching Game of Thrones, and the concept of the dragons and stuff put me right off, to be honest. Having said that, some of the Tolkien stuff, it's a good story. It's well developed, so I probably go that way. But again, I like stuff that's very gritty, realistic, where I can imagine myself in that scenario in, say, 20 or 30 years' time. That's the stuff that excites me, which I think Blake Crouch is more like that, maybe a little bit further out there than 20, 30 years. But, so those are the sorts of genres that I enjoy.
But well, I just assume, given that you're a Briton, that you might suggest J.R.R. Tolkien, since he's of your people.
Yeah, but I think just, you look at it for what it is. You look at the characters, you look at the plot, you look at. I found that some of that was really just a long journey, and I found that a bit predictable, a bit dated. These days, fiction's very sort of non-linear, and which is why I quite like Recursion, because it jumps around a bit. Although I think you've got to be careful there, because it can go too far. But so that journeying saga thing, it's okay, but I was watch the films, and they get a bit repetitive. I think there's one battle sequence after another, and a long journey. I think it's a bit lacking. But I'm going to get condemned for saying that over such great works. I'm sure in their time they were very, very brilliant.
I think that as long as people are honest in their answers, that's really what the readers want. They want to kind of feel you out as a person, and it's sometimes fun to disagree with people. So if you just agreed with everything they thought, it wouldn't be as much fun. So I think sometimes having opinions where we disagree can make the conversation more exciting. But speaking of exciting, sir, our sometimes co-host, Madam Stabby, Nick Garber's lovely wife, has added a new religion question, and you get to be the first one to answer this. Are you ready, sir?
Go ahead.
Coffee or tea?
Oh, definitely tea.
And how do you take it?
Just white, no sugar. I quite like coffee, but it doesn't agree with me. So, and I'm a cyclist, so I should like coffee, because every cyclist, they all drink coffee to encourage fat burn. But sadly, it doesn't agree with me.
I didn't know that about coffee. Okay, that's interesting. So when you say white, does that just mean regular milk, or like half and half, creamer?
Just a dash of semi-skim milk. That's a UK thing probably, but I always have, when I go abroad and even to the States, I usually have problems with getting the tea as the Brits drink it. To be honest, it's in fact sorry,
is that Earl Grey? Is that what you guys drink?
I drink it occasionally, but just English breakfast, just like a Ceylon tea, really, and
Yeah.
with milk, and I find that here it's standard, and yet when I go to Europe, it's totally, you know, it's almost a special for them, and they never do it very well. They have a Lipton's, and it never seems brewed properly, so it never tastes as good as in the UK.
So when you drink your tea, do you take it loose leaf or do you go bagged?
I go bag, but I think to be fair, I think the loose tea's better. It's just a convenience thing, and I think if I had more time on that, I probably would use all the equipment, a strainer and everything, and do loose tea leaves, because I think it is better.
Okay. There's actually a channel. I've been learning a little bit about tea through the back end, because there's a channel called Tea and Metals. It's a British channel, and they interview British military personnel who get like medals for bravery.
Okay.
And so the first question is, how do they drink their tea? And then, of course, they're drinking their tea as they talk about, you know, whatever event made them, you know, get so awarded. And so it's always fascinating, because they start getting into the minutia of the tea before they start talking about, oh, I went to this war and, you know, did all these horrible things.
I think the British squaddies, I think it's a tradition, the tea drinking. Yeah. And
yeah, there's a funny video that we share around every 4th of July, and it's a British tank commander talking about how their tanks are equipped with teapots and what they do to take their tea even in the heat of the desert, which I don't know. Like I drank coffee while we were over there too, so I get it. But it's funny. They're basically mocking us.
Okay.
There's a good natured rivalry. Like we had some of that when I deployed with some British units. In fact, he had family that were Handley, so we traded. I gave him my blouse, my desert camouflage top, with my 101st patch and all the stuff on it, and I got one of his mechanized infantry coats. And of course, both of us got screamed at by our senior NCOs for walking back to our area without full uniform, because we had to go back to our tents to replace what we just given away. So do what you got to do, though, right? I got that coat in my closet.
Should be encouraged, you know, the camaraderie between allies is crucial.
Absolutely. I think it was mostly good-natured fun, but I was willing to eat the cost of having to buy another blouse if I had to, because I mean, how often are you going to trade international uniforms like that, right? Like, and I imagine he's got it in his closet too somewhere.
It's like exchanging shirts after a football match, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That was the other thing that surprises me. Everyone talks about soccer or football for you guys is the international game. I had more conversations with the international people we worked with over rugby than I ever talked about soccer or any of the other sports.
There's a big following, in the UK for rugby. I think it's probably not quite on a par with football, but my wife's a huge fan of the rugby, and I tend to watch the Five Nations. So I enjoy that, but obviously that's just the European sides, and then obviously the World Cup. And then I like watching the football for the World Cup, but I'm not I don't follow the local league matches so much.
It makes sense though, because rugby started in England, so it would make sense that you guys would be, fans of it. So basically, some kid said, screw you, I'm taking my ball and going home, and some other little kid said, oh hell no, you're not, and a fight happened, and then they called it a sport.
I played rugby and football at school. I'm quite slightly built, and it put me off when my friend's leg broke when I was next to him in a scrum, so it put me off rugby. But
I played as a forward in college and briefly for the Army, and because we had military height weight standards, like our forwards were a lot smaller than most teams we competed against. Okay. So we had to go with we've just got to be quicker. Yeah, that's all you really can do when the guy on the other end of the line is like 6 foot something and 300 pounds of mean.
As soon as you get a little bit older and you can't run so fast, that's the time to quit, I guess.
Yeah, after the war and I got hurt, they were like, one more head injury could be the end of me. I got too many concussions in Iraq, so I can't play contact sports, but I can watch. The beautiful thing about having aged out of those sports is when you watch now, all the stories about how good you were just get that much better because prove it, right? Like nobody had cameras to record that crap back then.
Yeah.
So, so you could be that guy. Like, no, we totally ran faster than that.
I used to be a middle distance runner, so
Yeah.
I get that. So I used to do triathlons, but yeah, I'm
Okay.
not a footballer and a rugby player. But
So have you always, getting back to science fiction and since that's your passion, like how did you discover science fiction and decide that's something you would like? Did that come after your interest in science or before? Like how did that start for you?
so yeah, I've had 33 years in research, scientific research, and you can sort of see in various technological areas where things are heading. And I wanted a vehicle for, when you're constrained in your job, you have to be very pragmatic, and you can't look too far into the future with some of the ideas and research. But when I retired, I thought, no, this is the opportunity to consider where this might lead in 20 years time, perhaps. So that was a passion to get into science fiction to convey some of those stories. And then I was on a holiday on a Greek island called Skiros, which is they run these. My wife worked for the company, and they run these holistic holidays where you can combine lots of art type things like making crockery and doing pictures and writing and singing and stuff like that. And I wasn't normally the sort of person to go on a holiday like that, but I was thrown into having to choose some of the courses they were running, and I chose creative writing, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then that got me into thinking about joining the two together and combining the science. And I'd had some ideas for a story because I was working on there's a project called the Square Kilometre Array, which is currently being worked on, and it's a radio telescope that covers a whole square kilometre, and they're going to build it in I think there's two possible sites, one in Australia, one in South Africa. And the interesting fact for that telescope is they think they can point that, basically beam form that telescope to an exoplanet, and they can detect the equivalent of an airport radar on an exoplanet. And then that got me thinking, well, maybe if they survey all the exoplanets, maybe they might detect alien television or something. And then maybe in the future, our technical advancement isn't from our own research, it's by eavesdropping on alien television from exoplanets. And then that got me thinking, and that sort of started off the idea of the story. No spoilers, but the start of it is a satellite engineer detects a signal from an exoplanet, a little bit like Carl Sagan's Contact, quite an old book now, but that was a radio telescope. But I was told about that story when I started writing my own, and I read it, and the two stories completely diverge from the detection of the signal. So that's the only thing they've got in common. But I do think that will be how we detect aliens. And I'm quite skeptical of UFOs and aliens and all that sort of stuff, as you can gather from my interests in the science fiction and the fantasy stuff. But I do really think that it's only a matter of time before we probably detect signals from exoplanets. And so that was where the story started. And then some of the weird things that happen. I don't know whether it's appropriate to talk about my story now. You've probably got some other questions first.
No, you're fine. We're free flowing from here on out. So
okay, so yeah, the guy is based in Seattle at the start of the story, so I'm not going to give any spoilers. He detects this exoplanet signal, and then at the same time, there's an eruption of Mount Rainier, a bizarre coincidence of these two events, and then the story basically goes into why he looks into the signal and then uncovers things, and there's a connection there, which I won't say any more about, but it spans lots of genres and aspects. The story does, but that's how it starts.
So you mentioned that it's only a matter of time before they start detecting signals. So do you believe that there is alien life out there?
I'm pretty sure there is. It's how much is another matter. There's that famous equation, isn't it? I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Who came up with the probability of aliens, and there's a whole series of terms multiplied together, probabilities for, whether you've got planets that are near enough from the sun and the star that it's orbiting, and in a habitable zone, and have they got a gas giant that's soaking up any meteors that might be going to risk causing extinction events, and all these factors are put together, and water being present. And I think there's so many exoplanets out there that it's almost inconceivable that there isn't a whole spectrum of life, from like bacteria through to more advanced, with the advanced civilizations being far less probable. And I think if we can get a telescope sensitive enough to scan a large number of exoplanets, then I think we've got a fair chance of detecting something. I guess we'll only be able to look in the Milky Way. Beyond that could be technically too difficult, but I think there's probably enough. We've got the size of the Milky Way is pretty vast, so I think there's a fair number of candidates that they can scan. It's just getting the sensitivity, it's getting the beam forming, so that you can pinpoint those exoplanets with a sensitivity enough to detect those transmissions.
So what you're describing is it's called the Drake equation.
That's it. Drake equation.
Formulation. So one of the things that, because we understand with the formula like the Drake equation, the fact that we can speculate the number of planets that could feasibly have a life. Well, one, we define life like ours, and we ignore the possibility of like sulfur-based life or any of the other life that can exist in the extremes. And I think that's just our own bias. But I know recently in my lifetime at least, they discovered sulfur-based life forms in the desert, or the volcano in America. I'm drawing a blank on its name now, but
the Yellowstone National Park.
Yes, there we go. In Yellowstone. Sometimes brain damage, my brain doesn't always recall facts.
I think there's these things called extremophiles that live in volcanic vents on the ocean floor, and also in Yellowstone. Yeah, and I think they can live in very acidic environments, and whether those sorts of things can get very advanced, I don't know. And carbon, it's got its own organic chemistry. It bonds so well. It's almost like a Lego molecule, isn't it? Because of the four valency. So I still think that's probably, and also it's quite common in the universe. So I think that's still the most likely form of life. But beyond that, then the shapes of the life and things, I think, will be just predicated by the environment that it's living in, and whether it needs good eyesight or whatever the senses it needs to survive in that environment. It will have those different senses, I guess.
Yeah, so that leads people to question where, if we have the probability of life being what it is, where is it? Which is the Fermi paradox, because he speculated it. So do you address that if you're having them scanning the area and looking for signals? Do you address the idea, that you're by default then solving the Fermi paradox?
I guess one of the issues is the distances involved are so vast, like the nearest star's 4 or 5 light years or something. So you're never going to get a two-way communication going with those and anything that you receive is going to be stale. So I do think it's like looking at items in a shop window. You're lusting for these items, but you can never buy them. And I think that's going to be the case. You're going to detect these signals, but it's going to be one way, because unless there's a way around, the constancy issue of the speed of light that you can't exceed because of the relativity. I think, there's the faster than the light stuff with Star Trek, but unless people come up with a mechanism of cheating the physics, I think relativity assumes that you can't have any faster than light communication. There's a cone that's part of the formalization of relativity, that it can't go faster than that. So unless Einstein's a subset of the real truth, so in the same way that Newton was only a special case, if you like, and as soon as you go fast, you get these time dilation and mass increases and things like that, then and maybe things like with dark energy and dark matter, maybe, and looking at, I think there's talk recently of potentially a new force, and is there a new force implicated in these huge vast distances that is, maybe dark matter isn't an actual matter at all. Maybe it's something to do with the fabric of space. And maybe as a consequence of understanding that, maybe we will learn how we could have mechanisms to go those extreme distances. But yeah, I'm probably straying off piece from your question about the Fermi paradox, and we would have heard from them. But ultimately, you get from the technology that we currently know, a beam will diffract as it transmits. It will diffract as it propagates, and then that will spread the energy out. And then if you've got a detector and you've got thermal noise, then there's a limit to the sensitivity of that detector. So there's fundamentally a limit to the distance that you can see, and that's going to be true for someone transmitting and receiving. So I don't think necessarily we would have heard from them because they're just too far away. Maybe billions of years ago, before the universe expanded so much, maybe it was an easier task. But it's we're too far away now, and I'm just hoping that the distances to all the exoplanets that we could survey would give us a hit on one that has got life. Who knows? But that's where I'd put my money on us detecting aliens.
Okay. So do you worry, given that you write hard science, that people that are like not actual science, people that are just like you are going to be checking your math and like no, he got this wrong because you carried the one over here or something?
No, I purposely backed off. You don't want too much exposition in books. You don't want to appear to be lecturing anybody. So I'm very lightweight on the descriptions and the info dumps in my story. So I've got a few concepts in there, and I through the characters explain them enough, but I don't go over the top with it. And so the stuff's not explained to the nth degree where I don't think fault would be found. I've researched the topics. I've got there's quite a bit of biological science in the story, and I've got friends who are medics, so I've managed to check the stuff in there. Like I believe Blake Crouch, I read through his acknowledgements, and he was acknowledging his physics professor. So yeah, you have to check stuff through. But I don't, as I say, I don't go into it. I don't want to bore a certain sector of my readers, because not everybody wants to know the nth degree about the technology. I put, you've got to strike a balance. So there's enough in there to show where it could go and the interest, but not so much. I try and be a bit lightweight on info dumps in the story. I'd rather, and that's something I've had to learn actually as a scientist engineer. Wrote PhD theses and research papers, and you always have to spell it all out into the nth degree so somebody could reproduce your work. But in a story, you don't do that. You want to leave interpretation partially to the reader so that they're engaged. They need to be involved in. It's a two-way process. They need to try and work out things that are going on in the story. And I think that's one of the mistakes that amateur writers make, is that they spell it out too much and over-explain. They always say show don't tell in stories, so that the person reading the story has to get engaged. But I think it's more a case of don't describe, don't give a description, but don't explain. Don't explain what's going on. Give enough clues and enough information that they can work it out, and don't insult the intelligence of your readers, because they're smart people and they'll work things out. And looking at some of the feedback that Blake Crouch has had, people run with it. They love that. What does he mean by such a thing? And they explore it, and that's what I hope people do with my story.
Okay. Well, speaking of stories, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly show For the Man, and I'm going to air that commercial.
Humanity will be free, no matter the cost. Deep in the Guatemalan jungle, buried beneath a forgotten Mayan pyramid, an earth-shattering secret sits, waiting. Its discovery will rip apart the illusion that humanity is alone in the universe. Engaged in a life-and-death struggle for the future of mankind, Harry Rogers and Jess Cook are forced to protect this secret from the most despicable foes imaginable. They must race across the globe to complete Liberty Station, the first true interplanetary ship. Only then can they search for the shocking truth behind what they found. They have no room for error, because failure means death for them and subjugation for everyone else. Presenting Liberty Station, Book 1 of Humanity Unlimited, written by Terry Mixon. Purchase your copy on Amazon and learn more about the author and his works at terrymixon.com.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. So let's throw that cover up there. So what's the story of the art you chose? Like, how did you pick this? This has some definitely Dan Brown kind of vibes with this cover art.
Yeah, it's sort of intentional, I guess. In fact, the Da Vinci Code, some of the religious undertones of that story, I've got similar things going on with my story. It goes through one of the characters who's religious, and he's an engineer, a satellite engineer, and you've got the symbols symbolizing, if you like, the received signal, and his journey in trying to decipher the meaning of that signal. At the same time, we get the eruption of Mount Rainier at the start of the story, hence the apocalyptic type scene at the bottom. And I gave the brief for the story to the cover designer, and it was designed by Get Covers, and they're an outfit in the Ukraine. So it was really nice to put work their way at such a difficult time for them, and I think they did a good job. And I've had good feedback on the cover. It's sometimes I think I tried to do an earlier cover, and I think the author isn't necessarily the best person to come up with the concepts for the cover. They're almost too close to it. You try and put things in there that are maybe too subtle. It's really just to get some interest, and the fact you think it looks Dan Brown-esque is good for me. I think that because there are aspects that are related to that work. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. So what can you tell us about your main character in this novel?
So I have to be a bit careful I don't give away too much, but in the opening chapter, which you can read, you can do the look inside on Amazon to read that. He, as a result of his obsession, he's obsessed with detecting aliens, and that goes back to something that happens when he was a boy. He's got a young family, so he's conflicted on his obsession, if you like, with trying to find aliens. So he's split between that and his family, and then because of the events, that drives him into quite a dark place. And then it's about the trauma, if you like, of that, and how he works through the problems and tries to get to the truth of what's going on. I got to be careful. I'm just stepping around give you enough to be interesting, but not so much that I'll spoil any of it. I think that's.
Are there any secondary characters that stand out as well, or do you focus entirely on the main character?
So he's got a sidekick, and I would say who's an interesting character who was inspired by somebody I met actually in on the workshop I did, who's basically a Parkinson's sufferer. So I wanted somebody who was he was an extremely interesting person, the guy I met. He was a musician, and he'd even played with Lulu. I don't know if you remember the pop singer Lulu from sort of times of the Beatles, and so he in his day was a quite a big deal really musically, and yet his Parkinson's was so advanced that it reduced him to a shadow really, and yet I could see the man inside that was trying to he communicated through the few days I was with him. He communicated all these things, and initially I wondered who he was. He was like a ghost that would just hunched over ghost that would drift around the site, and then I found out that he was such a rich life, and he inspired the main character. The main character is called Arlo, and this his sidekick, his name's Carl as well as mine. He inspired that other character, and then Arlo's wife, she's religious, and Arlo's a scientist, and they're conflicted because of that. And I guess as the story evolves, they almost challenge each other on their thoughts, and it causes conflict and interest in the story. And that's where the slight sort of Dan Brown aspects come in, because he's trying to be diplomatic with his wife, obviously, but he's a scientist and a skeptic, and she's giving some views, religious aspects that he just can't go along with, but has to keep the peace. So that's a sort of a side aspect. And then I've got other characters that are the darker characters in the story, which I won't say too much about because I don't want to hint at any of the main plot. But so there's some dark, interesting characters they're almost caricatures, which some people might view as a bad thing, but they're meant to be like that. The more rounded characters are the protagonist and his friend and his wife, and they've got a son as well who's causes extra conflict as well with Arlo, the main protagonist. So it's quite a multi-dimensionally conflicted story, which I think makes for an interesting read.
Okay. So do you write this in the first or third person?
It's third person, yeah.
Okay.
And it's written through several viewpoints. So it's close third person perspective, and there's about 5 characters where you get their take on it to try and create more intrigue and interpretation.
So when you started writing, obviously you're coming at this from an academic viewpoint originally, and writing academic papers is a lot different than writing fiction. So was that transition hard for you?
It was horrific, yeah. So I did 2 writers courses. I did a screenplay writers course. I did some drafts. The only good thing about being a scientist is that you're extremely self-critical and you question everything. So I questioned my own technique, my own style, and I ended up writing the book probably wrote the book 10 times. It's taken me 7 years from the ideas to getting it published, and that part of that was, well, half of that time was spent learning the art. So I bought loads of books on learning the art, and I had to unlearn a lot of my scientific writing technique, which is absolutely not what you want to be writing like for stories. So and I had to learn about viewpoint and making sure that you basically you show, you don't tell. So you don't explain anything. You just give the body language and the events and let the reader work it out and make their mind up. Really, you're just a camera, if you like, and the camera has to, for some opening scenes, it will maybe scan like a drone looking down on a scene, and then you then go into the viewpoints of the characters. So you imagine you're looking through their eyes. So a bit like that. I'm trying to think of the name of the film, where, being John Malkovich, you're essentially looking through the character's eyes and interpreting things as that character and having thoughts as that character. And it's always a balance. If you have too many characters, you dissipate the focus in the story. If you only have one character, it maybe isn't quite so rich and doesn't give different viewpoints. And the nature of the story as well was such that I needed there's several threads, and if I didn't have viewpoint on some of the separate threads, it would make a rather sterile read. I wanted the reader to, be with those characters and enjoy the ride. So I've got to be careful not to say too much, but there is a more traditional sci-fi space opera thread in the story, but it's not quite in the guise that you would get in a traditional sci-fi story. I don't want to say any more than that; I'll spoil it. But so I do go down that road, but I do it in a manner which is plausible in a near future story.
So what would you say, given that you rely on being closer to scientific reality, as close as you can in fiction, what would the age range be for this novel, like for your target audience?
I think I've tried to write it as a layered story. So part of the story is like almost an adventure. So like a Da Vinci Code, like as I guess, as you were saying, Lord of the Rings, there's a bit of a journey, and that's an adventure, and it's got action. So that would appeal to, on my Amazon, I've got it set to 13 and older, but it does cover sort of some darker themes. So I do think really my primary audience is probably adult, but I do think younger people could take something from it as well. But I don't know. I really need more feedback, and whether sometimes people, it's like the Harry Potter books, I think, I don't know what the target age for those is, but I know that a lot of adults really enjoy them. So vice versa. I don't know whether young adults would enjoy this, because it raises some, I think sometimes the scientific questions are very innocent questions and they appeal to young people. And I find it amazing. You look on the BBC news site and then you look at the science area of the news site, and quite often it goes to links which are for school children, and I'm thinking, does that mean that adults aren't that interested in science these days? To me, it's the ultimate. It's the science is everything. Everything else is just artificial, and like politics and money and things like that. To me, I've always been sold by the science and trying to understand what it all means and why we're here and what are the limits. Can we push those limits? So that's why I'm interested in the near future science, because I have a thirst for the excitement of what if we detected an alien signal? What would that lead to? If you could detect their telly, you could see them, and it just opens up just mind-blowing opportunities, really. And I try and explore some of those concepts in the story, and also the biological aspects. We're at the cusp of a massive biological revolution, I think, in terms of gene, editing the genes and things. And again, I think Blake Crouch has written a book. I think it's called Update or something, which is based on CRISPR, which is a gene editing technology. And my story goes beyond that, I think. So slightly Elon Musk-esque in terms of, but takes it to its, where is it heading? And is, like all these wonderful technologies, they're both good and they're bad, and it's how they're used by people that, same with AI. It's how people use it. If the technology in itself is wonderful, and so the story has dark elements which looks into that. And there's also a romance theme in the story as well. There's a character I've not mentioned called Lana, who helps Arlo, the protagonist, to sort out what the signal means, and that causes further conflicts. But yeah, she's a neuroscientist, which a bit, again, it is similar to some of the things that Blake Crouch has done, and yet I hadn't read any of his work while I wrote my book. So we've got some similar elements, but also huge amounts that are different.
Okay. Do you is there anything you could tell us about the antagonist of this story without spoilers? Because obviously this is a spoiler-free zone.
So I can tell you, well, he's a satellite engineer. He's got a swarm of nanosatellites, and that swarm beamforms to the exoplanets. He's based in Seattle. He started as a UK national and then moved after his PhD to Seattle. And then there's this event, shall we say, and then they end up back in the UK. And he's got a son. His dad was really into science. Unfortunate things happen regarding his father. He's, if you like, trying to prove to his father that he made a bit of a promise when he was younger, and he's trying to prove to his father that he was right, if you like, and try and do something that his father would have wanted to have done himself. So he's almost trying to, they say about don't live through your children, but he's trying to almost do it for his father. So he's got that burning passion to detect aliens as a consequence of the bond that he had with his father. But then that's a side that maybe his wife doesn't really get so much, and in fact almost resents his obsession. And he wants to be a family man, but he also wants to be a scientist, and the two sometimes are conflicting. And that goes through the character arc, through the story of the journey of how he starts with this obsession and follows him in that path through the story and through all the trials and tribulations that happen.
So they obviously detect a signal. That's pretty much given in the premise of the novel. Do you show the actual contact in this book?
Yeah, it's a totally standalone single story. It's not a series. You get the whole shooting match about the signal, and it leads to sort of profound. The signal is, trust me, is it goes deep. It explodes in terms of the things that go on, and you would make you think, wow, it's not just a signal. Trust me, it's
So
it opens up the whole story, and I can't say too much because I don't want to spoil it, but yes, it's not like Contact at all. The Carl Sagan story where it was mind you, I think I think his signal was some sort of blueprint, wasn't it, for making some time traveling machine or something. So that was, very, very interesting. Well done. So mine takes a different, but equally, or maybe more, thought provoking journey than that, even perhaps. But then, who am I to say that Carl Sagan is a legend?
Yeah. So if we, at some point in time, you speculate that we will, just you as the author, not you as the character in the novel, that you speculate that at a certain point in time, we will in fact reach discovery of aliens. Would you want to be around when the aliens make contact, or are you perfectly happy not seeing that?
Oh, absolutely. Like when James Webb's launched, I was on the seat, on the edge of my seat when I was watching the rocket fly in, and it was on, I think it was on Christmas Day, wasn't it, or something? And I was glued to the television watching that, and the concepts in my story are, if you like, the next step, the next part of these radio telescopes, these space telescopes. It's taking that to the next degree. So, I like to try and keep myself as fit as I can, so that one of the reasons is to see as much science unfold in my life as I can, because I just think it's just amazing. And we're so lucky to have lived during the best period of time of mankind, really. The things that have happened, it's remarkable. And I just hope that the tech doesn't slow down too much. I know, like Moore's laws reaching limits, and you see things like Concorde now, supersonic flight, passenger flight, has taken a bit of a hit, and things like the environmental issues. I'm just hoping that we still keep advancing in other areas. I think the biological aspects are a huge area for the future, and space telescopes. And I think the SKA, Square Kilometre Array telescope, is a big deal. I was involved in working on it's something called a channelizer. So it, unlike a radio, you imagine a traditional radio, it tunes into a station, and then it will listen for a period of time on that station. Whereas the channelizer I was involved in working on, it will beam form to a point in the sky, and then it would simultaneously monitor every single frequency in the spectrum. So it's listening to every channel all at the same time. And I guess in the future it will try and monitor many, many points in space as well at the same time as well. I think I'll try and remember the name of the telescope that's currently up there that's trying to do a exploration of all the exoplanets, and I think that's got the ability to scan around the sky, look at huge areas. So I think we need to do that. We need to monitor all of the sky all of the time on every frequency, and if we do that, then the odds of detecting, compared with the SETI type listening to certain frequencies like the hydrogen line frequency, a special frequency that they monitored a lot. I think the odds, if we monitor all the sky and all the frequencies, I think the odds go up massively, and then that could mean make the difference to detecting. So I just hope the SKA telescope comes online, within my lifetime and has a few years of operation, because maybe that's what it will take. It's a collaboration between universities, which I think in some ways is a bit of a problem, because you need some of the industry needs to drive it as well. I think you need the fusion of the best of universities and the best of industry. And I was working in industry at the time when I looked into designing the channelizer. It uses things called FFTs, quite an amazing bit of tech. It's used in satellite comms.
Did you do you follow the modern space race? Did you see that we're recording this, dear listener, on August 23rd? India just landed their rover on the moon, making it the fourth country to have landed on the moon.
Yeah, it's a shame though, isn't it, that after the Apollo program, we've taken so long to advance, go to the next step. Elon Musk talks of going to Mars, but I just think it's probably similar to the moon, and maybe they can detect fossils or something there. But the things that really capture my imagination are these deep space talks of deep space missions. Can we go to some of the exoplanets and do it within a lifetime and set up some missions so that our children get to see the results? There's talk of using lasers, I think, to accelerate micro spacecraft.
Oh, the light sails, yeah, I've seen some of the mock-ups of that.
Not the big light sails, but having a series of micro probes, so they consume hardly any power, and they also are easy to accelerate because they've got low mass. And then have a relay chain of these micro spacecraft, and then you concentrate a laser on the back of them to accelerate them up to a huge speed before they lose contact with the laser, if you like. And then you have a relay chain so that you can communicate back down that chain. So even though they're small, they can still get a signal back to Earth and go to some of the exoplanets. I think there's Kepler. There's a series of Kepler ones that are. There's a registry of the best candidates, if you like, for life for some of the exoplanets. But I think one of the themes, I think, is the red dwarf. There's a lot of red dwarf stars, and whether the exoplanets around those stars could have life, because they're tidally locked. And I won't go into too much, but I touch on that in my story. So it looks into a tidally locked world and the implications. And I think that's only been touched on by a couple of authors in the past. So I consider whether I think the verdict's still out on whether you could live on such a tidally locked world where you get this very hot region and a freezing region, and then a like an annular region between the two, where you could get the conditions that are favorable enough for life. But whether that would work, I think is still open to debate, and I come up with some ideas for that in my story.
Okay, so you added some tech to your story of some of the future tech that you hypothesized from what we know now. So of all the tech that you added to your universe, which one do you want to actually happen?
It's a tricky one, that, because I think it's a case of, it's like the atomic bomb, really. You've got the atomic energy, but you've got the weapons, and I just think all of these technologies that I've put in there have got a dark side. So can we trust humans to, with great power comes great responsibility? And I'm not sure especially given what we've seen in Ukraine, whether we can be trusted. And I don't know. I think it'd be great to have this tech and some of the ideas in the story, but I think we need to be policed by something to stop us, stop individuals doing things which are just crazy. Like when they were loading up explosives on the roof of the nuclear power station in the Ukraine and the dam and things. And it's just, if you've got heads of state behaving like that, can you trust any of these high techs? It's I don't know what the answer is. I'd like to see it, but I'd like to also see humans treat these things with respect.
Okay. Well, we are butting up against the hour, and we're trying to do better about the timing. But was there anything we didn't ask you about with the Patmos revelation, to include where the name? Well, first off, where did you get the name?
It hints. I don't want to say too much again about that because it's got a double meaning, and it's deeply rooted in the story. And I don't want to explain it because it gives too much away. But I tried to come up with a cryptic title like that. Sadly, it's not the best title for getting sales on Amazon. You need to spell out what the book's about, but I purposely it has some religious connections, but I'm not personally a deeply religious person, but one of the characters is, and it just explores some of those aspects. So if people are interested in religious sci-fi, there's going to be elements of the story that would appeal.
Okay. And you said this is a standalone novel. So what are you working on now?
So I've had lots of feedback from the story, and it's been largely very positive. And so I'm trying to build on this story now, and I'm probably going to partner up with a female friend who and do maybe a time traveling romance sci-fi story, which would build on some of the ideas in this story. So they'll be totally standalone, but it might have a thread running through them, which is the bioface, perhaps, which is this embedded. I can't remember whether I've talked about that on the call here, but a central theme of the story is the bioface, which is an embedded, like a smartphone embedded in the body, but goes far beyond what a smartphone can do. So it's connected to your senses and to the brain and where that leads. So that concept might run through the stories I'm going to do in the future. So there's elements of that basically would it enables travel over vast distances and time, potentially over time. So that lends itself to, the trouble is with a lot of the time travel books, they're very I find them a little bit of a problem because of the paradox. You get the paradoxes that form. So I'm trying to find a physics, because my background, I'm a physicist, try and find a plausible way you can do time travel without breaking some of these rules. And I think I've got some ideas for that. And but I think a romance core would lend itself well, and having a female writer on board will help characterization.
Okay.
So that's the next project, but I just need to get on top of. I want to see this story through to as far as I can get it regarding getting people to read it, because it's such an investment of 7 years of my life. It would be a shame that people can't enjoy it. So I'm just trying to get more traction on people reading it, and then I'll be on to the next one.
Okay. So was there anything about the Patmos revelation that we didn't ask you that you want to tell us before we wrap this up?
I think I don't want to say any more because I think I don't want to give it away. I want it to be a pleasant surprise. Hopefully people will see this and will be interested. And I don't want to spoil any of the story. It's so rich and deep, and I don't want to detract from that.
All right. And so before we let you go, dear listener, I'd like to remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part. This is especially true with debut authors and their debut novels. It helps tweak the algorithms, helps get them views, potentially sales. If you find an author you like and you want them to be able to keep reading, something as simple as telling a friend and leaving a review can be the difference between people finding the book and then being able to continue and not. So do your part, dear listener. We would greatly appreciate it. With that being said, Carl, how can listeners and readers and viewers find you?
I've got an email address, carl@thepatmosrevelation.com. And I'd love to hear from people, and if they've got any questions about the story or feedback. And I don't mind negative feedback. In fact, that's the feedback I like the most, to be honest, because we're always learning, and I'm a perfectionist, and scientists, we always recognize that we make mistakes and things, and I just would love to hear from people. So yes, carl@thepatmosrevelation.com. In due course, there will hopefully be a website, and then things like newsletters. I've got the URLs for it, but I haven't got around yet to making that go live. So once the marketing things are sorted, I'll be getting on with that.
Okay. And you can find us. And as usual, everything will be in the show notes. Since we're recording this in advance, he will have time to make all of his social medias, and we will link them in the show notes. So check them out. They'll be brand spanking new and shiny when you look at them. You can find us on our Linktree at linktr.ee Linktree /Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, Linktree /Blasters and Blades podcast, where all of our links are listed, including our BitChute and Rumble, which YouTube does not like us linking to, but we are on all the places. You can find us on Twitter at SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can follow Madam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagrams if you want to send the hate mail. She thinks that stuff is fun. So have at it and have a conversation. We have a Facebook page where we share all of our episodes, book reviews that we find, and the like. We just get generally nerdy on that page. So hit the like and follow button over there, and you'll be entertained. We have a website over on anchor.fm /blasters tack and tack blades. Again, anchor.fm /blasters and blades, where for as little as 99 cents a month, you can help keep the lights on, or you can support the show more directly over at buymeacoffee.com /author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com /author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink until the Java pours out of their eyeballs, and then we'll film it and sell it at 10. And with that being said, I've almost forgot. We do have a Facebook group as well, facebook.com /groups /Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, /groups /Blasters and Blades podcast, where all the shenanigans happen. So be sure to join us over there as well for the discussion. And we will see you next time. So thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For the absentee Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next time at the same time, next week. I can speak. At the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And thank you for coming and talking with us, Jamieson. Oh, man, it's been a long day already, and it's only 3. Thank you for coming and talking with us, Carl.
It's been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And when we do some more panels, we'll definitely have to have you back, because we're starting to do more just general chats about all things nerdy. And I'm trying to put together a few topics with panelists that I can grab from your tiny little island, so that way time zones are easy, because there's a couple of you guys over there that are fun to talk to. But time zones being what they are, I think you guys are GMT +5 from us on the East Coast?
Yeah, 5 or 4. I don't think we really got to the bottom of which one it was, to be honest. But
Yeah, time zones are evil. I hate them. I mess them up all the time. I really need an app that just tells me where the people are, and I can enter like, oh, they're here. This is what time it is. Make it easy for me. All right. Thank you for coming by, sir. It was a blast.
Thank you very much.